I want to start talking about how to organize the breath in the core of the body. So most of us do too much frontal breathing and don't get enough breath in the back. So I just want you to see for a moment, as you inhale, the diaphragm moves down, the ribs move out, and as you exhale, the diaphragm moves up and the ribs funnel around the core of the body. Good. And again, inhaling, diaphragm moves down, ribs front and back, move out. Exhale, diaphragm moves up, and again, ribs are funneling around. And now again, just breathe a little more into the back. That's it. So as she breathes in, she actually lengthens the spine. And as she exhales, diaphragm moves up and ribs funnel down.
Yeah, I think one thing that singers tend to forget is as we're using the abdominal wall in the exhalation, we think a lot about this long line of the rectus abdominis, and we feel this scoop. But the scoop is actually very wide. It's a very wide sensation. And this upness and width that we feel in the upper back, we feel where the diaphragm is very wide and all through that abdominal wall. So front and back very wide on both the inhalation and the exhalation.
So I want to talk for a moment about your feet. Your feet are the foundation of your body, and any irregularities in the feet reflect all the way through the torso. So I want you to begin, which is actually where you're standing, with your legs right underneath your pelvis. And I want you to notice whether your weight is more on your heels or more on your toes, more on the outside of the foot or more on the inside. So I want you just to gently move back and forth and putting the weight more on the heels, and notice what happens to the rest of the body, how you shorten the hamstrings, and then as you come forward, put more weight on the toes and just notice how you dump into the front of the body. So just slowly moving back and forth. I want you to make that movement smaller and smaller. There's always movement in the body. We're not looking for a static position, but you want to find the place where you're supported right underneath the arch. Now I want you to press the four corners of the foot down. You have the mound of the big toe, the mound of the little toe, the inside of the heel and the outside of the heel, and press those four corners evenly. At the same time, I want you to think of extending the heel back and lengthening out through the toes.
Right. Yeah, the four corners, that's what I call the four-pronged electrical plug. So we're plugging our feet into the ground to ground the body.
So as you extend the heel back and you lengthen the toes, you actually start to create the arch, which will move up, and that will be the beginning of the support coming all the way up through the center of the line into the inner thighs, all the way up out through the top of the spine. So now that we've talked about the feet, let's move up to the legs. Most of us tend to put more weight in one leg than the other. So I want to think that you're gently moving back and forth between the legs, and I want you to think that the pubic bone is going to drop down straight between the legs until you find the point where you're evenly balanced between the two legs. And this will feel probably different than the way you normally stand. Okay, at the same time, I want you to think more as a thought than an action that the knees are soft, so that you're not muscling this through, but you're just creating an opening in the back of the legs. Now, when you stand, most of us overwork the quads and shorten the hamstrings. So what I want you to do is to think, you can actually take your own hands, that you're bringing the quads back and you're lengthening the quads up underneath the pelvis at the same time as the calves are moving forward. So right through here, I want you to lengthen a little bit more, that's it. And that will allow the hamstrings to lengthen also. As another thought, we're supposed to be really supporting through the inner thighs. So I want you to think of the outside of the calves moving towards center, which will create more support through the inner thighs. And what you can do is you can actually place a block between the calves and gently press them, which will get you working more through the inside of the legs and actually really nicely releases the outside of the legs. Okay, now that we've talked about the feet and the legs, I want to talk about the pelvis. So I want you to image the whole sacrum, the bone at the bottom of the spine, and I want you to think of the whole sacrum moving forward. Now what happens with many of us, the top of the sacrum might go forward, and if the top of the sacrum is going forward, you're hyperextending. Or sometimes the bottom of the sacrum goes forward, and then you're tucking and sitting into the thighs. So I need you to think that the whole sacrum moves forward, and as the sacrum moves forward, the thighs move back and the calves move forward so that you don't lose any of your oppositions. Now,
Right. That vertical line of the sacrum, keeping that vertical, that's what I call neutral, the neutral position of the pelvis. So you're not hyperextended, you're not tucked, but thinking that sacrum vertical and lengthening in both directions.
Now I want you to think of the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is created by the 4 points, the 2 sits bones, the pubic bone, and the tailbone. And they should be correctly aligned if just the sacrum is moving forward. And these 4 points create a diamond. So as you inhale, I want you to think of breathing down and the sits bones slightly widen. And as you exhale, from the inside the sits bones, that diamond moves up, creating support for the pelvis without over tightening the glutes. And again, inhale, sits bones widen. And as you exhale, from the inside the sits bones, the whole pelvic floor moves up.
Right, and that pelvic floor moving up, supported by the inner thighs and all the way down to the feet, is the beginning of the support for the diaphragm that most people recognize here in the abdominal wall, but may not realize that it goes all the way down to the bottom of the torso.
Another way to find the support in the pelvic bowl is to place your hands on your hip bones and gently press in, which will help you feel the width of the pelvic bowl. And as you breathe in, I want you again to breathe into the back of the pelvic bowl. And as you exhale, I want you to breathe around the sides. That's right. So the belly is hollowing out and widening. And again, inhale and exhale, breathing around the width. Allow the belly to hollow out and widen. So ideally, you want to think of the spine lengthening, the ribs attached to the back, lengthening down so that the diaphragm can move freely. So what I want you to do is to interlace your fingers and to bring your arms slightly forward in a diagonal. And I want you to think of lifting up the back, allowing the whole rib cage to move up so the spine lengthens and the ribs now can hang more freely and you can release through the front. Turning around. Now I want you to think of a line of energy from the pubic bone to the middle of the back. I want you to think of breathing in, and as you exhale, I want you to think of your lengthening from the front all the way through the back so the spine lengthens and the ribs hang. And again, inhale and exhale. Same time, I want you to think of lifting up the shoulders. Shoulders move up and then slightly widen. And the lower part of the shoulder blade moves towards center, moving down the back, anchoring to the center of the spine and underneath the armpits.
And then for singers, you feel that it's not a lifting of the shoulder girdle. It's just sliding those shoulders over the rib cage, feeling that width, anchoring down the back, and then wrapping around into the lats for that back support that we all want to use. You can put your thumbs in between the shoulder girdle and the rib cage here. If you feel a lot of pressure of muscle pushing out against your thumbs, just try to soften it with your thumbs. That space needs to stay open so that the shoulder girdle floats off the rib cage. We want an unimpeded rib cage. We even call it a shoulder girdle. You don't want to think of it like a girdle squeezing the rib cage. You want the rib cage to be free. And so that idea of the shoulders sliding, coming down, and then that being part of the wrapping around of the back, you want to feel that as an anchor but never as a push. Singers tend to think a lot about widening in the back, so much so that they compress in the front or they lose their length. We want that width in the back for sure, but we're 3D as a performer. You want width in the front, width in the back, and never sacrificing that length.
So now that we have the rest of the body organized, I want to talk about the neck and the head. So the spine is lengthening and the neck is a continuation of the spine, so the neck will naturally lengthen also. Many of us take our heads and we press our heads down on the spine, which actually then will shorten the spine. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to image a pole going from one temple to the other. And I want you to take your head and gently nod your head forward. That's right. So the weight of the head now comes off the spine, allowing the spine to lengthen and allowing the jaw to release away.
For singing, thinking about that pole for the temples, you can think of the head coming forward. That's like the Italian bel canto idea of biting the apple, so that the skull is active, the lobe is less active. For certain pitches, for certain kinds of singing, you can even think of it pivoting the other way. This will actually change the position of the larynx slightly, depending on what you're trying to sing. But in general, you want to feel that back, up, and over idea of the head.
And even when you drop your head back, you still want to feel the length of the spine, so even though the head is in a backward position, it's not pressing down on the spine.
Exactly, you're not breaking the neck, but you feel that long line in the neck.